Hello everyone, welcome to another PropTech Ramble Series 3, first episode. With me I have Bogdan-Adrian Nicoară and James Dearsley. Bogdan, CEO and founder of Bright Spaces. Can you give us a bit of an introduction, who you are and everything about Bright Spaces?
Sure, thanks for inviting me here on such a short notice and an interesting subject. I know just a bit. My experience is 15 years in developing software and digital apps. I started with PropTech and real estate only 3 years ago, so I needed to learn quite fast. We started Bright Spaces, which is an awarded VC-backed PropTech startup aiming at changing the way you showcase and you market properties, especially commercial properties. Yeah. We started that from the office sector, and now we're stepping up the game, and we are repositioning ourselves to become the creators of the digital twin universe for brick and mortar landlords. And I use the words carefully because of what happens into the metaverse right now.
Let's not go down that line. And you've said PropTech, so that's the overall theme. So I'll come back to that. So James, co-founder of Unissu, man I speak to quite often, and your
sadly
Eddie. Just for anyone who does or doesn't know, give us a bit about Unissu and you and Eddie founding it.
Yeah, sure. So we founded Unissu. Actually, we were at MIPIM 4 years ago, and we sat down in a cafe and we decided that we needed to create something because no one had actually done it at that point. But Unissu ostensibly is a procurement platform. So we help the real estate industry identify, and ultimately procure the appropriate solutions that they need. Of which, we're analysing nearly 10,000 different PropTech companies from all around the world, and we help some of the largest real estate providers ultimately try and make sense of all of the crap that's in there, really, because there is an awful lot of it, and find the one which is suitable for them. Because for too long, PropTechs have been knocking on the door and saying, we're the best solution for you, and actually it needs to be the other way around, which is the property industry needs to say, this is the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, this is what we need.
Who do we find? Yeah. And it needs to be a complete reversal of that entire process. And so that's what we built 4 years ago. And the PropTech world has matured an awful lot in all the time that I've been in it. And I think that's what we're here to talk about. So.
It is. And both your companies are growing quickly, which is good. But the theme today, which you both said the word PropTech, and we use the word PropTech all the time, but the origin of PropTech, and is it a dying word? Someone put something out on LinkedIn, I think, or Twitter. Not on
I think it was you, wasn't it? Didn't you say
it's
a dying word?
Yes.
It was. I said it was. And I think it's a disappearing word.
Disappearing word. That was it. Yes.
That's a very politically insensitive word.
Actually,
why did you?
We said that, but it was. Forbes didn't accept that, so it was.
So why do you think it's dying or disappearing?
I don't know too much about, and I will leave this to James, obviously, for the history of PropTech, because I know you and Eddie have some things to share about this.
Yeah, of course.
But how it all started, actually, I was discussing with our head of comms and content guardian, Juana, which I always brainstorm and spar my sparring partner for anything that we release online.
Yes.
And we were just thinking about all the new words that are coming. Like you now have Contech, you have Climate Tech, you have Fintech a lot in PropTech or in real estate. And we were like, okay, what's actually happening? How are all of these words being used? Are they overlapping or not? And is PropTech the king of these words in real estate? And if in the future we will still refer to PropTech, or real estate will just swallow so much technology that it will just be real estate. And we thought about the comparison with the phone, because it was phone in the beginning. Then we had smartphone, like mobile phone, but we are now still calling it phone. And it's like the most complex device that we carry around. And it does much more than telephone calling. I think that's the least what we are doing with it right now. And I believe that PropTech, not now, not in the next 3 years, but maybe 7, 10 years, 12 years from now, will not be a word that is used that much, because it will be probably more technology in real estate than real estate in real estate.
Yeah. Well,
that's
to stay around for a bit, because that's the only word I know. So
it's what gets on all the investment decks as well.
Right. We're a PropTech company. You know,
but actually,
PropTech on LinkedIn.
But that's the point, right? And that's why it probably won't disappear. It certainly won't die. And I think there's probably a longer conversation around the disappearing, dying, and all that sort of stuff. And equally, there's probably a longer conversation to be had around the sort of the different verticals within PropTech, climate tech, comtech, clean tech, all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure we can touch on. But I mean, the origins are somewhat, if we take it right back to the sort of the starting point, the origins of PropTech are somewhat convoluted in terms of when it was all set about, how it was all set about, who it was all set about. You talked about the hashtag PropTech. In reality, from my experience and my opinion, that's actually where it came from.
Yeah.
And I can chart it all the way back to sort of 2013-14. And really, what I had seen, so this is a personal opinion rather than anything remotely qualified, there was a movement of real estate technology coming from the US. And it had been around for years. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are individuals who will claim they've been in prop tech for decades, and they have. But sort of pre-2012, 13, 14, there wasn't anything there around a terminology or a word or anything like that to bring a community together. What it was beforehand were software providers, sort of pre-2000s. Then there was sort of the portal years of 2000 to 2005, mainly residential, a little bit commercial. Then, sort of that 2010 to 15 period was when people woke up to there being a community about this. It started genuinely in America, and it was called real estate technology, or what they termed was RETech. Now, I remember distinctly in 2013 saying this makes absolutely no sense to anybody outside of the US. And let's be frank, the world is a lot bigger than North America at that point. And I just remember distinctly saying, because I came from a marketing background, and I just said, look, the one thing you need to do is to build a community, give them a voice, and give them a channel on which to speak. And in those days, it was really around Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. And I started using the hashtag PropTech simply because it made more sense to the rest of the world to call it the property technology sector, not real estate technology. And it got shortened. Fintech was already around. PropTech was there.
So you're the originator?
No, not at all. No, I'd love to say I was. I don't think I am. I just remember that there were a few people talking about it. I can't remember who. I mean, there were a few key people.
I tried to look it up this morning on the way in, but I couldn't find a clear point in time where it fit. But you're right. It did come in. It used to be, so prior to Metricus, when I was asset mapping, it just used to be called smart building technology. Yeah. What are you? We're a platform. We're a software company, and we help make your building smart. So therefore, we're smart building technology.
But that brings to what Bogdan was saying, though, which is it was a subset.
Yes.
At the time, you needed a catch-all phrase. It was RETech. We made it PropTech, and genuinely, what then happened was everybody. There was a bit of an argument and a bit of a tussle between the North Americans RETech and us with PropTech, and actually the Europeans really won out because there was a massive social community which was generated. I started the Sunday PropTech Review, which had thousands of people reading an email every Sunday, which was around PropTech, and then the investors started calling it PropTech, and then the VC funds started to call themselves PropTech funds, and it sort of burgeoned from there. And really, to take on your point about climate tech, comtech, and all that sort of stuff, smart building tech, they all became verticals of PropTech then and now. So you can almost sort of track the history from that 2012, 13, 14 period to maybe 2015, when you had sort of the first accelerators and funds that were being generated, both in North America and the UK market. You look at Pi Labs, really. Metaprop came along a little bit later in terms of that accelerator then building into a fund. And then 2017 was, I think, actually a seminal year, because that was when the first academic report into PropTech came out, which was State Business School and Oxford University. And the reason I put that as a real seminal point was what Professor Baum at that time tried to do was to map that sector. And the recognition that PropTech was a catch-all phrase. And in reality, he based it on things like real estate fintech, smart tech, and just sort of categorized it into 3 or 4 different parts. And I remember at the release event, which was actually held over here in London, and I was asked to be on the panel to discuss his report. And it was fascinating. You know, there was the who's who was in the audience of the property industry, but I was probably one of the only people who fundamentally disagreed with his report, and it was terrible. I mean, it was shocking, because in this room, and I just said, look, I think it's wrong, because the classification is wrong. You can't have PropTech is this sole thing, and only real estate fintech is this next biggest thing. It's much more than that. And you've got this property life cycle you have to consider, which is around build, manage, buy, sell, and manage being the sort of the overriding piece of that. And we've missed the point. And within that whole life cycle, you've got your clean tech, your envirotech, and everything.
That's why when you see all the one pages that come out that say the top 100 in PropTech, it's why the pie is split into so many different sections. Because there are PropTech companies that just look at leasing.
Yeah.
We'd never do that. We're not doing that. But then, then you've got smart buildings platforms then you've got the contract management, you've got workflow management. There are so many different ones. It is a catch-all, but it does break down into smaller bits of the pie. And you're right, it is the overarching piece. But
still, one of the points I just bring on about construction technology at the time, and it's still, I think, a little bit the case now, is that construction technology and property technology were seen as two fundamentally different principal disciplines. And that was really led by the venture capital market. And there was so much money going into Contech, and they weren't able to merge the two. And that's what we did when we started Unissu back 4 years ago, was we said, well, hang on a minute, if the planning stage of finding land, sourcing land, and filtering land is PropTech, and effectively the manage and the buy and the sell and the rent is PropTech, why are we suddenly skipping construction technology? It needs to be merged together.
And that it's not really there, but it is. I think that will merge because it becomes part of this. We are now working with some construction tech companies, Contech companies, and they are doing the build part. But then what's happening is that, and this is where the journey comes in, James, and your managed piece underneath is quite right. Is when you're doing the build part, generally when you're construction technology, it's a project. So everything is done, whether it's purchasing, project management, workflows, and then sign off is done, and then it's finished, right? But there's a ton of data in there that is very valuable to the customer that then doesn't get used. And then some PropTech company comes in, sticks in a load of sensors, but doesn't think about anything to do with this. So we've actually started to partner up with the Contech companies to say, what have you got in there that we can either bolt straight on to our platform rather than the customer have to start from scratch? What can we bring in that is valuable to them? Oh, our planned preventative maintenance schedules, the handover, the next maintenance date, all of those sorts of things you can bring in. And then the customer's got a continuation. They don't have to start and stop all the time with a new platform or with new data because there's data there, right? So context should be within the PropTech space because it is part of it. And then the next part, when it's in operation, it's there. Companies like Metricus and Iconics and Code Labs and all these other guys, we are not contract management, but there is contract management that goes into there as well, and that all needs to bolt in together. Now, some of that, when you create a workflow, like some solutions can, you've got the data from the handover. It was installed on the 6th of April, so next maintenance date is the 6th of April 2023. You can start a workflow and push it into something like Yardi or Plan On or whatever that is. So there's a bit in between, and you get an in and an out. But at the moment, it's stop-start, and there's a little bit of wasted money, wasted time and processes that all needs to come together. Is it PropTech? At the moment, it's PropTech. Will it be called something else? I don't know. But
it is the biggest challenge of the sector, though, because of the broadness of it. So if you take something like Fintech, and one of my arguments to counter that whole dying or disappearing is the fact that Fintech hasn't died or disappeared, and they're probably a decade ahead of PropTech. But if you look at it, Fintech is quite narrow in its definition. PropTech brings in all of that and more, and that is the biggest challenge that we have. And it's also the challenge for the non-sector specific property people. Take the VCs, for example. They are so broad, or they were really broad at the start, and now that sort of evolution of this as a sector, and this is what I've seen over my career, is you initially had PropTech specialists. Now you've got vertical specialists within PropTech, and that's where the VC evolution is coming, which is, well, I'm a CRE-tech specialist VC firm, and I think that is needed.
I have an opinion on what you said about fintech, and I think it kind of depends. It's separate from PropTech because fintech itself, I think it's becoming a vertical. If you look at incumbent banks, right, they're being disrupted from the ground up. Some might say as much as the brick and mortar real estate is being disrupted by the metaverse, I do not agree with this, though. But in fintech, this is true. Like, you have new types of banks, you have new types of insurance, which they are fintech first and financial secondly. Like, they came from technology, and I believe fintech will prevail as a term. I'm not sure PropTech will prevail in the future, because we will always, hopefully, live in this brick and mortar world.
Yeah,
like
I'm not living in the metaverse, by the way. I'm living in the metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. So all the interconnectivity that we have between Contech and Climate Tech, and I believe now they all converge into PropTech. And I believe this will still happen for a lot of years. But I'm just curious of the future of the terminology, when everything will be so merged between technology and the real world. Like, we're now always saying innovation layer, technology layer, because it's still a layer. Unfortunately, for real estate, the biggest asset class in the world is still experimental for many of the landlords or construction companies and so on. So we don't have full adoption of a lot of solutions yet.
We're still in the infancy, right? Even the companies in this space, so software companies and hardware companies, we're still quite immature in this space. You know, we're not like routing and switching, which has been around for over 20 years, 30 years, even longer. But the companies in the space, even Metricus, we're only 3 years old. Iconics have been around a little bit longer, and a few of the others, but we're still in quite an immature market. And you're right. A lot of the, how many buildings there are? 6 million buildings of 10,000 square feet or above in the US, right? How many of those actually have some form of PropTech or smart building technology in them? Not a lot. So I think it'll take quite a long time for you might be right. It might just get to a point where there's technology in buildings let's not say 5 years, but maybe 10 years. There's smart technology in every building, and buildings are then just smart. So maybe that's when it will start to fade out. But there's a long road to go before you get there, because a lot of buildings, even the one across the road from us now, that was finished just before COVID. And they've got basic BMS and climate control and access. I don't think they're monitoring indoor air quality or energy down to the nth degree, or doing building automation or anything like that. I can tell you they're not, because the lights are on. I was here through most of the lockdowns. I have a wife and 3 kids and needed to get out of the house. But the lights were on in that place, so they're not doing anything smart. So PropTech will be around for a while, because I think the market's still
what's also interesting? It's about the companies that are creating technology for buildings, which don't call themselves as PropTech companies, although they are doing a lot of automation. And so that's also another thing that I was thinking about. Why isn't everyone that is actually creating technology, software or hardware, for the built world, call themselves and adopting the term PropTech? And one of the ideas that came to me was because there is established traditional companies, software companies or hardware companies, that don't go to VCs, that don't go to the same events that we are going to, and that they don't see themselves as PropTech, which is the new and sexy term.
Very interesting.
I think quite connected to the VC world and to the high growth and scalability. Maybe you don't agree, but this is how I feel. Like, if you talk about traditional company, they will say, we're creating technology for real estate.
And Honeywell, they call it Honeywell Building Technology. They don't call themselves a PropTech company. They call it, it's called HBT, and it's Honeywell Building Technology Group, right? So it's about building technology. They don't call it PropTech or smart building technology. They just call it building technology. So if the big boys start to do it, maybe that might accelerate
we have SAP, we have Oracle, we have everyone obviously deploying solutions into the built world, and they never call themselves a PropTech, not even for a small part of their company that actually takes on this vertical. So
is that partly because they're big companies like Johnson Controls, OpenBlue, Siemens, Honeywell Forge, Carriers, what's the Carriers called? Carriers got one now, the name escapes me. But they don't maybe call it PropTech because of where they come from, right? They come from the HVAC mechanical engineering world that they make hardware, they make HVAC systems, they make sensors, they make everything. Maybe that's why they don't call it PropTech. They're not young upstarts or startups like us.
No, I think you've got there's another angle to this which I don't think we're really touching on. I mean, we're recording this in an office block in London, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned over the last, God knows how many years of flying around the world, talking at conferences and building communities around the world, is we live in a tiny fucking bubble in London.
Yeah.
And New York does the same thing, right? And we are familiar with the term of PropTech because we've been talking about it for so long. But when you fly to the Middle and Far East, or when you fly into Lagos in Nigeria, or in particular South America, for example, they are right at the start of that digital transformation journey. Because that's the other point here. PropTech is a symptom of change. It's not the actual change. The actual change is digital transformation. So I think we've got to get outside of the bubble that we're in and realise that we are at the start of our journey. We're there. We've gone over the hype cycle of PropTech. That was probably 2017-18, which was a freaking massive hype cycle. But there are some continents and countries which are not even, they're on the start of that drive up. Yeah. South America is midway up the hype cycle. It's there, it's going. So that's the one thing I would definitely think is you've got to get some global perspective of where we are in the chain of things. The second angle I would say is just bringing in a point when you said, Metric is only 3 years old. I don't think that matters anymore. I don't think it matters if you're 10 years old, 3 years old, or you started today, because what we've had is with the global pandemic that we've all experienced and gone through, what that has done is it's put a massive reset button in everything. And I'm not just talking about property companies realizing that PropTech exists. Every single company is now at the point of understanding they have to bring technology into their buildings. Now, the reason for that is twofold. There's a short-term and there's a long-term impact, which again is why I don't think PropTech as a term is going to disappear or die anytime soon. Because in the short term, one of the biggest challenges for leaders of the property industry, and when I mean property, I mean anybody that has a portfolio of buildings where their employees exist, right? So that could be heads of real estate, could be heads of facilities management, could be any of these things. They have a short-term challenge, which is to make their staff feel safe and secure to return to office, not return to work, because that's a bullshitty thing, which I think is a load of rubbish.
No, that's it.
They want people to return to the office in some cases, and as a consequence, part of that is fitting building out with sensors and tenant experience type things, which means staff feel secure, safe, and actually encouraged to go back, because the alternative of being at home, actually, it's as good going into the office. So that's a short-term thing. The bigger factor for me in terms of the long-term chain of this is sustainability and ESG. And that's why you suddenly, and especially if that starts getting pinned to executive pay.
Or it is sales calls.
It is in some cases, but you're going to find that in all countries, I think, where you're going to have to pin it to executive pay.
If people like Salesforce are doing it for their chief execs, and it's a big part of it, then other companies will follow.
And as a consequence, who are the executives going to start pinning it all on? They're going to start putting it on their buildings. Because the buildings are definitely
the biggest contributor, right? Exactly. The people who fill the building aren't, but to power the building for the people that are in the building, they're the biggest contributor.
And as a consequence, this whole hype cycle around PropTech starts again, in my view, because non-property people, or in theory, sort of the JLLs and the CBREs of this world, the non-property oriented people who are there in Facebook building portfolio management are going to go, we need some technology in here, and they then discover PropTech as a part of it. So the short and long-term drivers of keeping the term alive, and then there's the geographical drivers of those big businesses in Santiago in Chile with a portfolio of 5 different office buildings, and they need to put sensors in there. So technology is going to keep being at the forefront for those two things, return to office and sustainability in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. So what's ESG tech going to be called? ESG tech.
And it could be all of those things.
That's what we all overlapping. Like we see even PropTech VCs investing in companies which most of us wouldn't probably call PropTech.
What do you mean?
Like you can, and I heard about this and I discussed about this with some people, like you can connect almost any kind of service, and especially new kind of service, to the property world. For example, Zoom, for example, it is Zoom part of the metaverse? Is Zoom part of the...
You keep going back to the metaverse.
Yeah. You say you don't want to be in the metaverse, Bogdan, but you're talking about it a lot.
But it is, like, everyone is talking right now about this.
I'm not. No.
He's putting his foot down. He's saying no. But look, if you have to come in here to get away from your wife and 3 kids, go to the metaverse.
The metaverse is going to help that, because if I'm still in my house, but I'm in my metaverse, I can still hear them all, and they're all still asking me to do stuff while I'm at home. The metaverse is an interesting one. We should come back and do that whole topic.
It's entirely different.
Is it just virtual? Is it connected to the real world?
Well, that's an interesting one, because what we are doing now, and I'm just going to talk about Manchester for a minute, so I'm going to be a little bit selfish, so apologies, people. We are being asked to connect to things like HoloLens, so that we can pull data out of buildings, so building management systems, so a HVAC unit. Pull the data out for an engineer, may not have to go to site immediately to see what's the fan coil unit doing, what's the fan speed doing, what's the incoming temperature, the outgoing, the set point, and everything else. Put a HoloLens on and have a virtual view of that unit. That is happening now. We are working with Microsoft and Avanade on this, and it's going at quite a rapid pace. So that is happening, and that's kind of a virtual world. It's not metaverse at all.
But it's augmented, right? It's an augmented view.
It's an augmented view, but people are still calling that PropTech. But HoloLens is not PropTech. Microsoft Dynamics is not PropTech, but they are two systems that are being bolted on as part of the PropTech ecosystem to give the data that is required to an engineer before he or she needs to go to site, so they can increase the first-time fix rate and bring everything they need, and they know everything about the unit before they get there. All of that's being pulled into it. Is it PropTech? It's not. It's not really.
That's my point, that I cannot see the boundaries itself in some
I think it will become blurred. I think it will become blurred because there, as you just rightfully said, there's more data being plugged into PropTech, whether it's the virtual reality or whether it's third-party pieces of equipment, or whether it's third-party platforms that have nothing to do with PropTech, like invoicing or purchasing or Contech.
Even more soft pieces like the community part in the tenant experience app.
Yes.
Or the concierge part, or the ordering, like from partners.
Yeah.
Which is ordering from restaurants is like a totally different system. Is it PropTech or not?
You know what? The biggest problem
we could spend a lot of time on this.
Well, you could, and it's good, but it's also a waste of time. For me, take the HoloLens example of that. For me, that's brilliant. It's a seamless integration of technology and data that comes together to augment a view of a property manager's view of the world, or a contractor's manager, a view of the building, whatever it is. That is what it should be there to do. We defined PropTech. In fact, it was myself and Professor Andrew Bourne back in 2017 when he released his paper, because he released this wonderful paper about what is PropTech, and PropTech 2.0, I think it was called. And there was no definition of what it was and what it wasn't. Now, the problem when you define is that people will always disagree. But once you define and you create a framework of rigidity around what is and what is not PropTech, you then are able to start comparing properly. One of the biggest challenges, and I see it in report after report after report, VCs say X amount of money has been invested in PropTech. Yeah. Now, it's crap. It's absolute nonsense, because everybody has their own definition of what PropTech is and what PropTech isn't. I still do not know one group other than ourselves who've actually said, this is our definition of what PropTech is, this is the framework on what we've built it, and therefore we can always pin back everything to it. And that's why it's difficult. We're just of the belief that as long as you say, this is what we believe, then whether you're an academic institution, a VC, or just an organisation, you can say, well, actually, I agree with it or I disagree with it. And as a consequence of me disagreeing with it, take co-working as the classic disagreement. Is co-working PropTech or is it not? We always feel it's not. It's an evolution of a real estate leasing model. But the point is, if you don't agree with it, you just bolt it on. As long as you've got a framework on which you can work with, then you should be in a better place. But I don't think it matters. Is PropTech making a difference in the real estate environment that we're living? Yes. Will it evolve? Yes. Will it evolve in every single different country differently? Yes. Will it evolve in different sorts of organisations differently? Yes. And that is the best thing about it, because we've got an entire career of helping.
We all need to make money from it, so it needs to stay around for a little bit longer.
Money? No idea what that is. So that's where we are.
Cool. Gents, on that, thank you very much both for coming in and making your way to the office to do it in person. Bogdan, you've actually flown into the country. So, and James, you've travelled from far-flung
miles and miles.
Just like Nick Barnes.
Absolutely.
Gents, thank you very much for being on the first PropTech Ramble Series 3. I really liked it. Bogdan, we will do another one and we'll talk about the metaverse because I think you actually secretly like it. But
I do like it. I do not agree with everything. I do
okay. So we'll come back and talk metaverse, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Gents, thank you both very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Have a good day. Thanks for coming. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again soon.